Welcome back to Diagonal Hell. It's been quite a while. Last time I kited a demolisher for about 2 hours to avoid dealing with cliffs, built a quick and dirty Vulcanus base, and expanded the Novice Spaghetti to use foundries and produce 90 SPM of all the Novice science packs. I then got keeping your hands clean by destroying a single biter nest with an artillery train, and instead of setting up any kind of real defensive perimeter with my newfound technological resources, made a beeline for Gleba. So, that is where we are now. I brought some resources over from Vulcanus on my space platform for when I set up the real base, but before I can do much of anything, I need to get my hands on a few biochambers. On an unrelated note, the trees here explode. Anyway, off to map out the area and grab some starting resources. Gleba is a very interesting place. Unlike the normal planets, there are no ore patches to speak of other than stone. Speaking of stone, you need a lot of it since half the planet is shallow water that you can't build on, so landfill is very necessary. Anyway, since there are no ore patches, you get your starting iron and copper on Gleba from rocks. But Gleba is Gleba, and the iron and copper rocks give you iron and copper bacteria, which you can't do anything with until they spoil into normal ore a minute after harvesting. After that, it's business as usual, and you can smelt it into plates to make circuits and other goodies. If you have only played vanilla Factorio, this talk of spoiling is likely pretty unfamiliar. Almost everything on Gleba in some way comes from fruit. And when any biological item is crafted or harvested, this activates a timer, ranging from a minute to around 2 hours, after which it will turn into spoilage. Spoilage, although it's used in a few recipes, is essentially garbage, which can clog up everything from belts to crafting inputs to fuel slots. And the only real way to get rid of spoilage is to burn it. So, how do we deal with this? There are two primary ways, as I see it, to approach base design on Gleba. One of them is to produce only exactly as much as you need at any given time, and ensure that materials are always being cycled so you never end up with any spoilage in the system at all. The other approach, and the one I will be implementing for my first base, is to assume that you will always be producing spoilage somewhere, and ensure that every single place where spoilage could possibly be produced has a way of trashing it so things don't clog up. All that aside, after some exploration, handcrafting, and some very tense negotiations with the locals, I'm able to craft a few biochambers. Like the foundry, these have a built-in 50% productivity bonus, which is likewise very useful. With that, I can start building. I'll spare you the 20 minutes of messing around that produced this thing, but behold the cornerstone of my factory. It holds a buffer of spoilage and uses that to craft nutrients to keep the biochambers supplied with fuel. When a shipment of fruit arrives, the biochambers are then ready to craft it into bioflux, which is used to produce fresh nutrients which can be transported elsewhere in the factory. So far, jelly nuts have been a pretty good fuel source for my single boiler steam power plant, but I'm going to need a bit more than that very soon and should probably be using a more efficient fuel source. So I'm making rocket fuel. The first step is bioflux, which I'm making by direct inserting mash and jelly. I'm going to stick to belting raw fruit only where possible, since it has a much longer spoil time than its subsequent products and is thus more viable for short-term buffering. This should mostly keep my fruit belts from backing up with spoilage, which is one less thing to worry about. Anyway, once you have bioflux, add water and jelly and you've got all the fuel you'll ever need. The next step is iron and copper. There are no iron and copper ore patches on Gleba, or being instead acquired from spoiled bacteria, as I mentioned earlier. The bacteria themselves can be harvested from rocks or crafted in a recipe which takes in mash or jelly and produces about 10 spoilage for every piece of iron or copper. This on its own is pretty inefficient, but if you have bioflux, you can feed it to the bacteria to cultivate them, which you can keep doing infinitely until you either back up on ore or run out of bioflux. I'm using furnaces to start out because I have yet to bring calcite over from Vulcanus. Speaking of calcite, I'm reconfiguring my science ship to work solely on interrupts, so it will wait at Novice and occasionally go pick up calcite or science when it needs it before returning to Novice. I'm going to use this ship to drop calcite off on Gleba for now and set up a dedicated ship later. Now that calcite is on its way, I can tear down the furnace stack and replace it with foundries. With calcite dropped off, I have my sweet productivity bonus. Now to design the heating tower setup. I won't bore you with most of this, but making diagonal designs that are actually tileable is, needless to say, a rather infuriating experience. Incidentally, here's all the blueprints I've made in this run so far. My base is struggling with power because of the foundries, so I'm adding in more boilers as a very temporary measure. To make the heat exchangers and heat pipes, I need a bunch of copper, so here's my makeshift foundry setup. After deciding I hate everything about my heating tower design, I redid it and went off for a little walk to clear my head and collect a bunch of iron from the rocks lying around. A few minutes and a couple of circuit conditions later, and my heating tower is running. I set the burner inserter to only insert fuel when it's below 600 degrees and there is no fuel already in the tower. This is about as fuel efficient as I care to get. Also, if you're wondering where I've been getting my jelly nuts, I set up this manual farm a couple hours ago. I've just been ferrying fruit over from the farm occasionally since I'm not setting up trains until I have most of the base mapped out. No use letting things rot unnecessarily. For copper, I'm reusing my bioflux and seed culture design from iron. It's exactly the same setup, so here it is basically finished. Since I'm going to actually need them now, I'm running a power line out to the Yumako biome. Setting up a farm is simple. Put the tower down, let it collect all the random sticks, and then it will eventually finish that and start collecting fruit. Here's my first test run of the current base. It has become quickly apparent that I messed up the nutrient belt for the ore cultivators, so I'm going to fix that. With the bioflux pulled off the belt, the nutrient problem is fixed. Now that this has run a bit, I'm running into a new problem where the ore cultivators get blocked and stop working because the bacteria on the belt hasn't spoiled yet. After some deliberation, I'm adding a buffer chest so production only stops when it's well and truly backed up. Ah, the joys of diagonal belt routing. Due to my eternal lack of landfill, here's a couple of big miners that'll just dump stone into an assembler to accumulate some. Now that I have both copper and iron, I can start working on getting some more materials. First up is green circuits. It's pretty much the same as the designs from the other planets, so here it is finished. I've wasted a lot of time at this point just staring at my factory, both because biochambers are incredibly satisfying to watch, and because I'm kind of surprised it's working as well as it is. Now that I have something at least moderately functional, it's probably time I stopped running fruit manually, so here's some trains. I'm doing the same sort of vaguely spaghettified train network that I set up on Novice, except here I'm doing it with bidirectional trains because I don't really care about efficiency with this base and I think it's kind of funny. I'm using a single direction roundabout because it doesn't matter, and with that done I'm off to the jelly nut farm. Turns out that even robots picking up boom puffs makes them explode. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Running the seed belt to the trains is more difficult than I anticipated, but here it is done, and I'm off to set up the train properly for the farm. I'm going to have one belt outputting fruit, with harvesting slightly limited by the inserter not outputting unless a train is waiting at the station. I've also got a heating tower which will burn spoilage if my base is down for long enough that the raw fruit rots, but hopefully that won't be necessary. With that done, time for Yumakos. It's the same farm design, but I actually added a seed input belt this time, which I'll have to go and do for the jelly nut farm later. Both fruit types are now technically automated. With that sorted, that just leaves the question of seeds. Every fully grown Yumako or jelly nut tree gives you 50 fruit, and you get 1 seed for about every 50 raw fruit you convert into mash or jelly, so it's not a great idea to let any fruit rot lest you start running out of seeds. Biochambers do make this slightly less risky since you get 1.5 seeds per 50 fruit or so, but the point stands, so I'm setting up a system that converts the fruit into mash and jelly and voids those just to ensure that we get all the seeds we need. Here's a second setup for good measure. Up to this point, I've been manually duplicating pentapod eggs, but now that I have reliable fruit production, I'm going to get a better setup working, because I keep running out of them and having to go hunt down egg rafts to get more. I'm configuring this so there are always 1 or 2 eggs on the belt, and the machine will cycle eggs while nutrients are available, burning the extras, to ensure there's always a fresh egg available for crafting. Unless my fruit production completely dies, this should ensure I always have a reliable supply of eggs. Speaking of, my jelly nut production keeps falling behind the Yumakos, so here's a second farm. And here's a second Yumako farm for good measure. With fruit production under control, it's time to get the oil products out of the way. Gleba's recipes for all of this are pretty straightforward. Here, for example, I'm setting up plastic, which you get by combining Bioflux and Yumako mash. The most important Glebin resource going forward is definitely going to be Bioflux, since you use it to make basically every Gleba-specific recipe, usually by combining it with some other resource in a biochamber. Sulfur is made by combining Bioflux and spoilage. Thankfully, the spoilage belt is readily accessible, and I don't exactly have any shortage of it, not to mention the fact that rocket production really only needs a trickle of sulfur anyway. I'm doing a little bit of careful belt routing to ensure the biochamber doesn't run out of nutrients, but this should be fine. I've set up red circuits in much the same way as on Vulcanus, which leaves blue circuits, and then my circuit hell is temporarily over. Incidentally, I've been very disappointed to discover that you cannot make sulfuric acid in a biochamber, so I have to use a regular chemical plant. I feel like this sort of makes sense since sulfuric acid is generally harmful to living things, but I'm kind of sad about it anyway. Remember that water pipe from the novice starter base that I kept having to move because it was blocking where I wanted to build? Here's the Glebin version. Anyway, with iron connected, I have sulfuric acid, and thus blue circuits. Oh, also, the way I just did this was terrible, so I redid it because I didn't have a place to output the blue circuits. I'm setting up a dedicated fuel factory for rocket production with a dedicated bioflux assembler. The idea going forward will be to keep all of the bioflux as local as possible to each factory to maximize freshness. It doesn't really matter here, but I'm getting into the habit of doing it because it will be essential for science. Also, here's some lamps. Since I now have everything I need to make them, I'm setting up robots. Here's pipes and gears for the engines. And since I need to dispose of a ton of jelly here anyway, I'm going to turn some of it into lubricant. Engines are the same as on Novice and Vulcanus, not much more to report here. Everything's just made in foundries as usual. For electric engines, green circuits are lifted off the main belt. With lubricant connected, I've realized that I yet again failed to leave space to output the engines, so I'm redoing the belt. In any case, with the output belt done, I have electric engines. It's come to my attention that my spore cloud is growing, so as a preventative measure, I'm off to kill some pentapods before my farms get attacked. The strafers are really cool, but I kind of hate that you can't shoot their wriggler projectiles mid-air since it makes them basically guaranteed to hit you. Also, this has taken way more bullets than I was expecting, so I'm crafting more while running for my life. With the strafers dead, I don't really have enough bullets to handle the wrigglers, and I can't be bothered, so I'm just gonna go far enough away that they eventually de-aggro and either despawn or go join another nest. I have a single robot frame assembler here making logistics bots. Since I don't want to route red circuits through this mess of a base, I'm going to use the bots to make more bots. Anyway, I'm now routing the rocket fuel over to join the blue circuits. Now I only need low-density structures and I've automated rockets. Speaking of, here's the silo. Low-density structures are of course extremely straightforward since they can be made directly in the foundry, and they're so cheap now that setting them up is basically trivial. Kind of a nice change from the base game actually, since it's a pretty tedious recipe to set up normally. This is especially true for larger bases where copper throughput is a non-trivial issue to solve, and I'm glad I won't have to deal with it later. I've been handcrafting all of the planting soil I've been using until now, but now that I have robots I can get it properly automated. I've belted over the seeds and I'm throwing everything else in buffer and requester chests, and disabling the inserters when I have 1,000 of each type of soil in the system. I'm moving the landing pad to a more convenient spot since the calcite I'm importing is needed over here. Also, here is an aerial view of the base, which is now running beautifully. Gleba is and will remain very satisfying to watch. Here's what my spore cloud looks like right now. It's under control for the moment, although I expect I'll have to kill the nest to the bottom right fairly soon. Using my parameterized blueprint from earlier, I'm automating chests, which should ensure that I can still control the base from afar if I'm stuck on a different planet. Also, I'm finally automating biochambers. I've been avoiding doing anything with eggs besides burning them up to this point, but it's really time I stopped handcrafting these. I'm going to bring in most of the ingredients with bots and then circuit control the egg inserter so it will insert one egg at a time and will only do so when the assembler has enough ingredients in it to complete a crafting cycle. This way there's never any pentapod eggs sitting in the assembler that aren't being presently crafted, which should avoid any unexpected wriggler scares. I've set up this multi-recipe foundry here, similar to what I did on Vulcanus, because it seems silly to have a bunch of foundries for products the logistic network doesn't need very many of. It just dynamically cycles the recipe based on how much of each thing is currently in the buffers. Pretty simple. I appear to have completely forgotten to record this, but I did some other small base maintenance stuff, like adding more assemblers to the mall and putting concrete under the landing pad, and also headed back to Novice to fix power generation because power died like 5 hours ago due to insufficient coal. The Novice base is now running on nuclear and is much more stable. I'm adding bypass stations to both the Yumako and Jellynut train lines so I can have multiple trains in the network without them getting stuck, since it forces them to path onto the alternate line, opening up the destination block for the other train. This is an improvement to my previous system, which was multiple trains in the network without bypass stations, which somehow held out for an hour or so before deadlocking, but if I can get this working it should be a better system. Actually getting this working is a bit annoying since I added the second train before fixing the signaling, but after some amount of testing I think I've fixed it. Now I just need to make the bypass accessible to the other farm and we're done. The reason I've gone to the trouble of bolstering my farm throughput is because with the rocket and mall done, it is now time to work on science production. I'm using the same general design as I did for uranium processing back on Novice, which is the universal diagonal design for 3x3 buildings which I developed a while back working on my diagonal megabase project. It makes 4 belts accessible to each building, which is very useful. I'm putting mash and jelly on belts for once here, since it's a lot more easily expandable if I'm not direct inserting, and none of this should be staying on the belt for very long anyway. Science packs care about ingredient freshness, and I thus want my bioflux to be maximally fresh. As usual, I'm burning the raw fruit that reaches the end of the line to keep everything moving. It's time I conquered my fears of pentapod eggs spoiling on the belt, because I'm going to need a ton of them for science. I've set this up similar to Kovarex enrichment, where each assembler resupplies itself with eggs and all excess goes to other products. In this case, they're all just being burned because I haven't set up science yet. Also, eggs need a ton of nutrients, so I have a bioflux to nutrient biochamber immediately next to the egg crafting. Now I just need to double it. If this seems like a lot of eggs, it's because I'm shooting for 180 Gleba science per minute. I'm producing and consuming 90 on Novice right now, but since agricultural science spoils and the spoilage affects the amount of science you get from each pack, I think assuming I will only get 50% from each science pack is probably a good call, all things considered, since it's better to overproduce science than run out. The science pack itself is easy, it's just bioflux and eggs in a biochamber. And with that connected to the rocket, the first shipment of Glebin science is off to Novice. I was minding my own business until the 13 pentapod eggs I forgot I had in my inventory hatched and caused a bit of momentary chaos. Turns out I should probably be more consistent about keeping bullets in my inventory, since this could happen again, and this time I was stuck handcrafting them. Anyway, with bioflux now in the network, I'm finishing my soil automation. Also, allow me to present the average Gleba experience. Something is out of nutrients, and now suddenly everything is turned into spoilage and everything's backed up. Having nutrients in the logistic network is helpful as a stopgap measure, since it means I can supplement the nutrients of these biochambers if they ever run out, ensuring that my fruit belt doesn't get clogged up like this again. Here's the science chugging along very slowly because Novice needs calcite. Anyway, back on Gleba, I've been setting up more farms. For some reason this keeps running out of... I'm not sure why I didn't get Watch Your Step from that, but achievements have been a little weird during this run. Anyway, back to farming. I'm now in a situation where I can consume almost a full half-belt of fruit, so I'm setting up farms and trying to generally increase throughput with the goal of more consistent agricultural science production. I'm adding yet more train bypasses, this time without stations in order to allow for even more trains. Time for more farms. I'm taking advantage of the natural jelly nut swamp to the west of my original farm now, which I considered doing earlier, but it didn't have enough natural soil to be worthwhile before. Since I'm trying to get more agricultural science going, I'm optimistically adding Gleba text to the queue. First up, rocket turrets, and then Captivity. Incidentally, I have no idea how Captivity works, but I'm going to figure it out when I get there because I really want Biolabs. I was hoping to automate overgrowth soil, but since it requires biter eggs and those scare me for the moment, I will not be doing that. Anyway, back to farming. It is kind of infuriating that despite not having unlocked overgrowth soil, the tiles that would require it are marked yellow for agricultural towers, despite the fact that I'm not currently capable of using it. I won't bore you with any more farming, as it's more of the same, so I'll get back to you when I have something more interesting going on. Okay, I'm running out of power line to the northwestern border, which I believe is a large lake, but I'd like to have some radars out there to tell me whether pentapod nests are nearby without me having to go explore. For the purpose of making carbon fiber, I'm throwing a single burnt spoilage, aka carbon assembler, in the middle of my spaghetti, which is just going to lift off the main spoilage belt. I'm definitely going to need more of this later, but this is fine for now. Here's a nice view of the science assembly running. I'm setting up a small assembly line for coal using my burnt spoilage so I can stockpile some explosives for my eventual rocket production. I have no real intention of setting up actual defenses right now, but I'm hoping to get a few Spidertrons built so I can eliminate pentapod rafts more easily while I'm off-planet, and the rockets will be helpful for that. With a little bit of Umako mash, I can make carbon fiber. My main goal with carbon fiber is to get stack inserters, since belt stacking would be incredibly helpful to have. On a different note, about a dozen hours ago I started sporadically working on a new space platform design using advanced asteroid processing. I haven't shown any of it until now because it was torn down and rebuilt probably a dozen times, so doesn't make for very good content. But here's the design I'm going to stick with for now, which makes red ammo for defense and uses nuclear power because of all the beacons. I've got a really janky fuel setup nestled right in the middle of the nuclear reactor, which can technically power up to 3 rare thrusters. After running this a couple times to make sure the asteroid belt is full, I'm off to Gleba, where I'm going to upgrade everything to stack inserters. With belt stacking implemented for a little bit, we now have stacked belts of red ammo. On that note, I'm off to Novice. Since I'm leaving, I'm finally setting up requests for Spidertron crafting in the mall, since I figure that'll be useful sometime soon. The stacked belts, as it turns out, can fit way more asteroids on them. Who would have thought? Also, I'm really happy with how this ship looks from the map view. The ship should be quite a bit better for transporting agricultural science than my other one, since it goes about twice the speed. Back on Novice, I'm trying to figure out how to lay out the Biolabs setup. The labs may be big, but they technically need to be able to take in 6 full belts of science, which, let me tell you, is not an easy thing to do diagonally, especially not if you want decent beacon coverage. I've come up with this design, but I don't like the fact that it's not really tileable, so I'm probably going to redo it. Okay, I've come up with a better design which is more tileable, and should be able to take in all 12 science packs while covered by 6 beacons per lab. The only problem is that there is no way for it to output spoilage, but I don't really see a way around that right now, so I'm just going to have to toggle agricultural science on and off manually depending on what I'm researching. Anyway, that's the setup, which means I now need to go get Biolabs. I've imported some bioflux from Gleba, which I'm going to use to make capture rockets. My plan is to go capture the nests right next to my factory, which I also used for the Keeping Your Hands Clean achievement. Before I do that, I'm going to set up a train since I know I need to feed the nests bioflux, and it's best to have a way to bring it over there. It's going to be a simple bidirectional train which takes in bioflux and brings back biter eggs. I'm going to use elevated rails to bring the eggs over the wall. I brought the capture rockets over so I can test them and see how they work. Well, that didn't do anything. Okay, let's try that again. Nope, back behind the wall. I'm so confused. It turns out that these are shot out with a rocket launcher. Okay, I've returned with a rocket launcher and a bunch of landmines to get rid of the worms. My ingenious strategy of using only landmines for self-defense did not in fact work as well as expected. Time for some deworming. The biters do not like when you destroy their turrets. After failing miserably to blueprint turrets with ammo in them, I'm doing this in a slightly more manual way. Welp, I cut it a little close there, but I guess that works. It seems these take some time to capture the nests, and I guess you feed them bioflux to stop them from escaping. Alright, I guess I need to bring in Bioflux before they escape, and I have to do this all over again. Here's a train. I think ideally what I'd want to do here would be set up a rocket turret with capture rockets, and resupply the regular turrets with ammo via train as well, so the system can recapture the nests if anything goes wrong. But I honestly don't need these to be permanently automated before I go to Fulgora. Just sustainable enough to get me Biolabs, so this should do for now. With that, I'm off with my first shipment of eggs. Back at the base, I'm putting the eggs in a buffer chest, but I'm just going to burn them for now until I've researched Biolabs. While I'm waiting for that, I'm upgrading all my mining setups to green belts and big mining drills. I honestly completely forgot that big mining drills stack ore automatically, so that's convenient. That means I don't actually need green belts for this whole setup, so I'm downgrading it back to red belts. After waiting a while, Biolabs are researched, and all I have to do is assemble them. Now all that's left is to bring all the science over to the new setup. With the belt routing done, the Biolabs are now running. Here's the nuclear power plant design I set up off camera before, and I'm now doubling because the base is on low power. It's a copy of the one on the new space platform. Here's it fully constructed. Now I just have to check that the fuel cells are being inputted properly, then I don't have to worry about power on Novice for a while. I'm being very cautious with my Productivity 3 module factory for the Biolabs. I'm putting some turrets right outside the assembler, so if any biters happen to hatch, they instantly die. Anyway, the modules are done, so enjoy this glamour shot of the Biolabs. Here's the explicit mechanism to disable the agricultural science belt. Basically, if I turn the combinator off, the belt turns off. I'm also adding a provider chest here, so if any packs rot, they can be disposed of accordingly. With that done, it's time I got off this rock. After something like 45 hours in this run, we're off to Fulgora. Look at the pretty purple clouds. The new frontier reached, I'm off to explore. I hope you've enjoyed this video. The next installment in this series, when it eventually comes out, will be about Fulgora, for which I have some very silly plans involving a lot of bidirectional trains. I know it's been 10 months since I released the last installment in this series, and I can't guarantee I'll have time to play or edit Fulgora for a while, since I've been very busy with graduate school, but I can promise it will come out eventually, since I have every intention of finishing this run. Before then, I likely am going to release a base tour of my vanilla diagonal megabase, which has been a long-term project of mine and has recently been nearing completion. While it is not part of my Space Age run, it does showcase some interesting diagonal constructions, and should give a good idea of what sorts of designs to expect from the post-Aquilo installments in this series. Anyway, that is where I'll leave you. Feel free to subscribe if you like this sort of content. Goodbye for now.